First off, I want to thank the brave men and women who work behind the wall. I want to thank them on a national level because their job goes unrecognized.
How do they try to turn a guard?
Well, correctional officer. Sorry, I apologize. But correctional officer. How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Guys, very important discussion today. We want to prevent inmate suicide. So today we're going to talk about some of the signs that can help us prevent. It's a very good dialogue because, guys, besides the fact that this is our job, the liability behind it all. You know, there's big liability if they can prove that it was preventable. So it's going to be a great dialogue. We definitely have some very good perspectives. So we have three guests outside of myself, me being the host, obviously, so I'm not really a guest. But technically we have 4 total people on today's show. So we have, guys, just wait for this. She knows who I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. The famous author of the book, The Cage Was Her Cocoon, Connie Alleyne. Connie, how are you?
Hello, everyone. Connie Alleyne here. I am the founder and president of the Civilian Corrections Academy and the podcast host of The Fly Behind the Wall and the author of The Cage Was Her Cocoon. Today's discussion, I think, is a much needed discussion, just as we, want to make sure everyone is aware of those telltale signs of an inmate suicide or suicidal ideation. So I look forward to chatting with the rest of the panel. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, it's definitely a needed discussion. And besides medical, we also have an investigator's perspective. He is now retired. He is also the author of 2 great books, Corruption Behind Bars and Inside the Inner Circle. And he also is an influencer on YouTube. His channel is True Prison Stories, and his name is Gary York. Gary, how are you, pal?
Hello. Thank you for having me on today. I love the panel. I think it's going to be fun. A very serious topic that is always in need of attention. I mean, it is our job to prevent inmate suicide. So I think with our panel, or the panel that you've put together, I think we can hit everything, hopefully. And if we missed anything, comment at the bottom of Anthony's YouTube at the end of the show, please. Thank you for having me today.
Of course, guy. And I think it's going to be a good perspective because, as again, just not just about preventing, but what happens when we don't step up and do our job. And that's where he can talk about what the investigators are looking for. So ultimately, this gives us a very good perspective. I also have with us, he is also an influencer, has a great channel, guys. Got to check on it. He should have more followers than he does. He's got to reach that 200 mark. He's almost there. Let's keep it going. The channel is called Correctional Officer Lifestyle. There's a lot of good videos. My personal favorite is the quotes that mold me. I just love that video. He also has a video out today about what inmates say and what it means. But again, he represents management at a high level. He's a captain, and his name is David Smith. What's up, Dave?
Not much, Anthony. How you doing today? Everything's going good over here. I'm looking forward to this because, by and large, security, or what is referred to as custody in other places, has the most time with the inmates, has the most contact with the inmates, and we're going to be the ones to see the signs. So it's important for this message to get out there. And I appreciate you having me on.
Always a pleasure, Dad. I appreciate your channel. It's a very good, informative channel. Now, guys, if you haven't, the show Tier Talks to you, brave men and women that work in corrections. So please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify you every time I post a video. We're going to go to our sponsor. When we come back, let's talk about inmate suicides, how we can prevent. But if we don't, what's going to happen to our career? What's going to happen to us? Stand by.
I wanted to attend a university that had an intelligence program. I wanted to look at problems different. I wanted to increase my critical thinking abilities. AMU offered those avenues to expand. Obtaining your degree as an adult, you're actually paying yourself and investing in yourself. You can't put a dollar on it. It's priceless. It's something that can never be taken away from you.
American Military University. Learn from the leader.
All right, now we're back. The first thing I want to point out there, guys, is this is inmate suicides or preventing inmate suicide. This kind of stresses on the importance of communication. Dave said it right before we went on break, right? What did Dave say? Security, custody. We interact with these inmates. We see the signs. But now if we're not communicating with the other departments, like medical, mental health, well, the problem is that, guess what? We may see the signs, but we're not forwarding it over to the experts who can help that inmate deal with that impulsive decision that they may make. Also, guys, let's not forget the other partners, like the program providers who, they may be dealing with that inmate too, getting those type of signs, and, where are they going to go? They're probably going to go to custody, or they can go to their supervisor, or they can go to medical or mental health. But the key here, guys, is that there has to be some level of communication. I would like to think that if a service provider sees something that's a little funny, not only do they notify their supervisor, but they go directly to the custody person to, call their supervisor and get that matter looked into. But again, there has to be that partnership. So I'll go first with Connie, because Connie's on the medical perspective. How important is that communication for you guys as medical and mental health providers?
So the communication is critical because we're tasked with taking action, right? So we may not necessarily know that someone has just received a harsh sentence, right? So we know that if someone is sentenced, they've got a long sentence, they've just gotten the word. Many times, they are in a space where they would have increased thoughts of suicide, especially if it's, long-term, right? I think there are other things that from a medical perspective or from the medical side of the house that we may not see unless we're in the process of doing an intake, right? So if we're going through intake and the inmate has, signs of self-harm, right? They have cuts on their arms and things of that nature. Those are things that would kind of raise the red flag that this person may have some suicidal ideations or be more prone to act out in a suicidal way. I think, but what you guys see in the housing areas that we might not see is you guys would see the impact of a troubling phone call, right? They got a phone call from a family member. They just got word that someone has passed away. Or even particularly I've seen a lot in female facilities when there's a breakup between two females, we usually get a lot of, this person is beginning to feel suicidal, or they start expressing it. Another thing you guys may see that we won't see that is a telltale sign is if the inmate is giving away their stuff. If all of a sudden they're giving away their commissary, they're giving away their meds, from us, we'll know that someone is not compliant with treatment any longer. That's something that we would be monitoring. If all of a sudden someone who was always compliant is all of a sudden not compliant, that's usually called to question, why aren't they compliant anymore? Why aren't they taking their meds? But you guys would actually see that the inmate is now giving away stuff. And that's usually a sign that the inmate has plans, right? I think there's a couple other things that we can explore, particularly on intake, right? If someone has a substance abuse history and, they could be going through withdrawal, if somehow we miss that through the intake process, and we realize that, for some inmates, they don't ever want to feel the feeling of a withdrawal. Some of them would rather commit suicide than to go through the process of physically withdrawing from whatever substances they're addicted to. Those are things that we would see. So I think that it is essential that we have that communication between the both of us, because there are things that custody is going to see that medical just may not see because we're not in the housing unit. Right? We may pick up on some things during intake, but after that first 72 hours, we may not see that person again unless they're being referred to other services throughout the facility. Whereas you guys would see them in the housing unit, and to see someone decompensating or starting to withdraw is definitely something that you guys would be able to raise the red flag and let us know that it's happening.
Yeah, and I want to highlight that withdrawal thing, because that's something, especially in the jails where they're dealing with the inmates right from the streets, and maybe the inmate's high on something and they're getting ready to crash. I just found that out recently, that their fear of going through withdrawal may wind up leading them to take their own lives. So definitely what you receive on intake again helps us, but sometimes inmates, they don't want to be put on that watch, especially if the inmate does want to commit suicide eventually. They're probably going to know how to lie their way through that. But a good detailed intake process is so important to the facility because that's going to guide us and tell us what we need to do, but also a trained professional that can read through the BS, maybe checking out on, the inmate says they're okay, but man, they have a family history here of suicide, and that could be, genetic. But Gary, I just want to ask you a question too, from an investigator standpoint, because there are some definitely more specifics we'll cover along the way, including the reaction once an inmate goes through suicide, what we need, or the attempt to commit suicide, what we need to do to, kind of further prevent that impulse. But Gary, if you were to investigate a suicide from an inspector's perspective, do you check out the intake process? Do you check to see what questions were asked and if the inmate was properly evaluated during intake?
Great question. Now, Connie touched on something that I want to hit real quick and then answer your question if you don't mind. Connie mentioned long sentences. And let me tell you the impact of that. I just retired from the sheriff's office here in Central Florida. We had a system in place. Connie hit on a very important topic. We have a lot of suicides that occur in jails right after court, after somebody's been sentenced. And what we did, if somebody was sentenced to 25 years or to life, anywhere between there, we had to write an incident report. It had to go with transportation back to the jail from the courthouse. It also was emailed to the shift supervisor that was on duty. Why? Because many inmates who are hit with long sentences, 25 to life, go into shock. Connie can explain how that works with the body and the mental state. And they go back to the jail and try to commit suicide. Family court also has a big impact. Children are sometimes taken away from a mother or father in family court. They're incarcerated. They're brought to court. The mother is told her children will be taken away from her. We've had it happen right here in Central Florida. They go back and they want to attempt a suicide because they feel they've lost everything. So there is another channel that connects with the jail besides intake and being at the jail. Court is very serious. You've got to get those reports out there to inform the folks at the jail. They don't know what went on in court. And when you write your report from the courthouse, put in there, the inmate was crying. The inmate was making statements of, I can't do this. I'll never make it through that life. Put everything in there so the jail's aware. As you said, Anthony, communication is the key to preventing these inmates from committing suicide and getting them on the right track. And then, of course,
add something to what you're saying too, just to compliment also Connie, but also yourself. I also read a statistic that it's 2 days before a big trial or a big case and 2 days after the maybe the verdict has come across. So also, if you have an inmate that is getting ready to go to court and possibly face that, they may have to be put on a watch a couple of days prior. That's what I heard recently. It was just in a statistic. Would you agree with that?
Yes, absolutely, Anthony. It's not just after the sentencing. It can be before court, during the trial. They could be in a 2-week trial and in the second week they realize, things aren't going my way. We need to watch them and report to the jail. We must keep in constant communication with the jail to let them know how these inmates are reacting during their trial, or we could have a suicide on our hand. Now, to your question, yes, when we investigate a suicide, of course, we're going to look, if it's a jail, we're going to see what happened in court. We're going to see what happened at intake. We're going to read their mental health records. We're going to read their medical records. We're going to read incident reports from the staff on the floor. We're going to search everything. And the goal of that is not to try to say somebody messed up. We're hoping to show that the agency did everything they could to prevent this suicide. That's the goal, not to get somebody fired or terminated. The goal is to show we did everything we're supposed to. Now, Anthony, you know as well as I do, and David and Connie, we still can do everything within our power, and they can still find a way to kill themselves. So that does not mean that somebody's at fault.
Right. And guys, by the way, this is great because there's a couple of things we emphasized so far. One thing was communication. And by the way, even if you work in a prison, inmates do go back and forth to court. They could have other cases that are happening while they're in prison, and they could be getting ready to get out and find out, oh man, I just been discovered that I'm, being charged for this. So, hey, Dave, just from your perspective, when you have the inmates that are going through the court process, prison level, and I'm sure you could discuss even on the jail side, how would you get that communication from what happened, at the courts, the outcome, and then how do you get that back to the hands of those that are going to have to manage this inmate inside the facility?
Unfortunately, on the state side where I work, the inmate will go to an outside facility. He'll go to the county jail of whatever county he's going to court in. And when we get him back to the institution, everything's pretty much already done. There's really no information coming for the individual coming out of court. But I think I want to touch on what Gary said. They take care of a lot of that inside the jail. So if there is an existential issue, then we might get an email from them. But other than that, there's no real information coming because they've already gone through that first 48 hours in the jail after their court hearing.
See, what I would think, I was wondering is if once the inmate gets sentenced, then your classification department may get notified and say, hey, guys, just want to give you the FYI, inmate such and such just got 25 years added to their sentence. So sometimes when we get that, automatically the inmate is now going to get sent to mental health for an evaluation. And then we're going to make a determination as to see where this inmate needs to be placed. Maybe a universal precaution. Let's put them on a constant watch. So, because let's be honest, guys, the constant watch really is to try to eliminate the impulse when the inmate is highly emotional. It's really a delay. And the reason why I say it's the delay, because like Gary and we've said before, if an inmate wants to kill themselves, they're going to kill themselves. But there are some where they're just going through a high emotion, and then maybe we can delay it by limiting their means to do it for a few days. And if by chance, after a couple of days, we move them from constant to close to try to, maybe we have to start getting them into GP. Maybe what we do is we house them with another inmate to eliminate the impulse, because hypothetically, I'm not expecting the other inmate to save their life. But usually if you have two cellmates, it's less likely the one may try to take that jump. Again, less likely, but there's always that risk. But again, we're trying to show the effort. And I'm sure if we ever get investigated, if they see that effort, if they see that, the person went through this news, we put them on close watch, constant watch, put them with a cellmate, and then they still found the time to do it. Look how many things we've done to prevent, look how many things we've gone through to prevent. And Connie, would you agree? I mean, close watch. I'm sorry, constant watch, close watch, and then, the person, does make multiple complaints that they're going to kill themselves, bunking them with somebody. Does that help us with the liability side?
So I think it absolutely helps us with the liability side. It shows that we've made best efforts to keep this inmate safe, right? Like, regardless of, so I think what we know about suicide is once someone has a plan, they figure out how to execute, right? Like if they are determined to do it, they will do it, regardless of all the things that we put in place, right? So I think it's important that we've documented everything that we've done. So there is an official record that shows that we've identified that there was a risk and that we've done our best to mitigate that risk. And if in fact something happens in between, it wasn't because someone wasn't, doing the watch. It wasn't because we just said, oh, all right, whatever. You know what I'm saying? We didn't disregard the information we received. We received good information. We acted on that information and we did our best to mitigate the risk. But the inmate had a plan and they executed that plan.
Now, real quick, I know some people are thinking, well, how can an inmate commit suicide even if they're on constant watch? Guys, I can tell you a crazy story right now where there was an inmate on a constant watch who is kind of facing the wall. Looks like they're asleep, and the officer's vigilant. They're watching them, and the inmate's making little movement, maybe a little movement with their head at one point. But again, looks like the inmate's asleep. Turns out the inmate bit right through their wrist and bled out. I believe the inmate was saved, but it can even happen on a constant watch, so again, being vigilant. But I will say this though, once we find out, because again, if the inmate wants to kill themselves, they're going to be inventive. They're going to find ways because that's where their mindset is. They got 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to think of inventive ways to get it done, which includes the timing of the officers' tours, things that are around that we don't think nothing of because, we haven't been exposed to that. But then once we get exposed and an inmate makes that effort, then we may have to go back and shift policies and really sit back like, man, how inventive was that? But I'm going to start with Dave first. When it comes to inmates and when it comes to their attempt at suicide, how inventive can they be? I mean, it's not like they're just hanging themselves off the ceiling. I mean, they get pretty inventive. What are some of the inventive ways that have even shocked you?
We had a situation where an inmate cut his own throat and laid under his blanket like he was asleep. It was in the middle of the night and he was just gone. There was nothing we could do to help him. And he gave absolutely no warning signs. He just laid in bed and did it. That's one of the ways. I've actually seen several creative ways for an inmate. Fortunately, that was the only successful creative attempt that I've ever seen. We managed to intervene and protect the others. But yeah, very creative ways. Crazy things.
Well, the funny thing about what you said too, Dave, is that obviously inmates are probably going to get razors, and we do keep track, but it could happen where we lose track of one. I mean, it does happen. Also, inmates can grow very long nails. Let's not lie. That thumb, that pinky, and they become so sharp that they do it. We also, how they hang themselves sometimes is technically right off the grill gate. I'm sure Gary has witnessed that a lot, where it's not so much of a direct hang. It's like they lean forward until they pass out. Maybe we have stuff in play where they can't hang up on top because it won't support the weight. But then what they do is they hang off and it's their own weight that they kind of just lean forward. And another funny attempt I saw was an inmate that tied multiple sheets together around her neck, around the room, and to the door. So when we went in, or if you go in to kind of open that door, especially if it's a code and it's emergency reason, you open up that door quick, all that weight is on that inmate's neck. So again, these are very inventive ways. But Gary, I mean, as an investigator, have you seen any inventive ways? I mean, obviously the grill gate is a big thing, correct?
Yes, the short hanging from the sitting position is one that is used a lot. And if you're an officer and you're not at your point where you're getting up to do your physical round where you're looking in the cell, you can just look from wherever you are and you think, okay, the inmate is just sitting there. It can be very deceiving. We also have had cases where inmates have made arrangements that they want to kill themselves so bad. They've made arrangements with other inmates, trustees in the jail or orderlies in the prison, to get some money sent to their account and have a razor blade dropped off, slid under the door real quick or something like that. Now, how do you prevent that? You're searching the cell, you're watching the inmate, you're trying to do everything, and you've got an inmate orderly slipping something under the cell door, or at feeding time, getting it in there when we're supposed to be watching 24/7, but come on, we're human. You turn your head for a second and they can get a weapon in there. There's all kinds of ways that the public does not realize how inmates kill themselves while they're on watch.
And one of the things that you mentioned, Gary, before that was good, is got to be careful what the inmate says, because even in a threat to a staff member, there could be something hidden that means the inmate's suicidal. I mean, you may have some inmates that may come up and threaten staff and then say, I don't care if you kill me. I don't care if you kill me. And then eventually, let's say the inmate does, and the officer wrote the charge specifically what the inmate said. They threatened me, but they said twice, I don't care if you kill me. Someone's going to ask, hey, I know this inmate made a threat, but was this inmate seen by mental health at all? Because there's a statement there that we need to worry about. And when that gets investigated, there's a liability there, because the inmate said that statement and no one looked into that to see what that inmate's concern was. And Connie, I know as a mental health professional, when you see those things, you are forced I mean, even if it's a threat against staff, you also have to watch for that inmate's benefit. So when you have that inmate, that's threatening staff, but in the process, kind of talking about self-harm, you have to now kind of say, okay, guys, we have another concern here, correct?
Yeah, you have to initiate any protocols that you have in place that would assess an inmate's suicidality. Our reality is that, I had an inmate one day say, I don't care what y'all do with me, I won't be here much longer. And I'm thinking, like, aren't you sentenced for like 10 years? What does he mean he won't be here much longer? And like when they say those things, it may seem like on a fly, it might seem impulsive. And sometimes in just the heat of the exchange, you might have just missed that. But like, all I'm thinking is, what does he mean he's not going to be here much longer? Right. Okay. Well, let him go be seen by mental health. Right. Because that's like, I feel like that's the safe thing to do. You take it. It's like, here's the hot potato. Don't leave it in your hands. Right. You've heard something. You've seen something. Somebody just said something. Sometimes we would even get inmates write and say, hey, my cellie keeps saying this thing, or my cellie keeps talking about dying. Right. And like, we have to take those things and respond to that when we get those things written to us, because wherever the information is coming from, it doesn't make the threat to end their own life any less real. It's still real, no matter where the source came from.
Right. And I also know, I don't know if you guys, hey, Dave, maybe you can help me out with this one, is I know during holidays and stuff like that, especially around, well, I guess Christmas would be one, but not everybody celebrates Christmas, but just in all fairness, just bear with me for the sake of my argument. We may post out memos to make sure that officers do extra rounds those days. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, that's a very, very common tactic. Another thing that you have to take into consideration, though, there are a lot of holidays that the inmates have that we don't know about. The anniversary of their crime, the anniversary of their sentence. We had an attempt on the 1-year anniversary of an inmate killing his wife. And that was a trigger for him. Those are things that we need to take into account. And those are the things where you're going to look for those warning signs that Connie was talking about earlier. To go along with them giving away their possessions, if you have an inmate that speaks to you every single day, and then one day he's withdrawn and he won't talk to you, that's a trigger, and it could be one of those holidays that he has that we might not know about. But definitely, you mentioned Christmas. Christmas is a big one. Valentine's Day is also one of our hot spots in Florida to look at.
Right. And guys, if you're on the outside of this looking in, so let's say you're a family member of an inmate and you're watching this program, make sure you take advantage of the proper channels when you want to tell the inmate about a death in the family. Make sure that you call the admin or the social service department so this phone call can be managed, which means that I guess in some places the social service department will schedule a call, and then they will have a mental health professional there along with custody to make sure that we can deal with the inmate's emotions. Some cases, family members don't follow that channel, and then the inmate gets word of it on a tier, and if they don't react loudly and they just kind of take it in and go back to the cell, you just did something horrible for us, because now we have no idea what the hell just happened. I mean, and Gary, I'm sure you're aware that during these investigations where when the inmate gets some bad news and you find out that the bad news really wasn't given during those proper channels where the family member, they want to hold the facility responsible. Hey, you didn't protect yet. Well, wait a second. When you told the inmate that this loved one died, you did it directly to them without telling us and letting us know so we can have our resources in play. I mean, would you agree with that, Gary, that when they do it that direct way, it puts us in a very bad predicament?
Well, 100%. You don't know how many times I'd get a call. Hey, I hear you're assigned to my son's case, my son's death. They killed my son. They killed my son. Well, if you don't inform the institution through the warden, through the chaplain, through the social services or something like that, and you get a hold of another inmate or another inmate's family member gets a hold of you, and then they get the word from another inmate, that their sister died, their mother died, their father died. You've created havoc for us. Now we have to go through not only the investigation of what happened at the prison, we're going to have to come outside now and interview people. We're going to have to interview all those people that got involved in delivering that message. And I have to get them either on tape or a sworn affidavit from them to show what they did. And it causes a lot of trouble for not only the inmate, but for the prison. We want the chaplain, like here, lots of times the chaplain and security will go and tell the inmate the news in private. They'll call the inmate out, bring them up to a classification office or somewhere, a security office, put them in there, and there'll be security and there'll be a chaplain and deliver the message. Now, we also, when we're looking at these suicides, there's people that watch your channel, Anthony, and mine. They're retired classification supervisors and officers from Florida. They remember me going all the time to get the inmate's file. And if you're wondering why I wanted the inmate's file, when I was doing a suicide or any kind of case, actually, I wanted to find past indicators from past incarceration. You know, a lot of these inmates are in for the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth time in prison. There's a lot of information in that classification file that can not only help mental health, security, investigators right now, when the inmate is alive, but even after a suicide, there's a lot of things in that file that might tell us a story. If you want your agency to get a good investigation, then you need not only the agency to provide whatever they've got, and you need an investigator who will dig deep and look for these things and not just brush the surface. Because what happens when it hits the newspapers? The newspapers are like the angry family member. They kill, did the inmate commit suicide, or was the agency at fault? So many things they don't know. We have to investigate everything and leave no stone unturned, because that's only fair to both sides, fair to the inmate's family and fair to the agency.
Yeah, and Connie, before I go on to the next part, I want to ask you, just from that civilian side, and if we do have somebody from the outside looking in and maybe they have a death that they want to report, what would you expect the agency to do to make sure that, we have the measures in play for the inmate to receive the negative news?
So we try to make sure that, one, we have a psychiatrist available, that we have the social worker available. If the inmate is already in treatment, whoever that treatment team is, that they're all available, and that we're kind of all sort of prepared to support the inmate through that process. A lot of times, the news will come in different ways. As an administrator, people will call me and say, hey, listen, the inmate got a phone call today, and this is, apparently there was some conversation about this thing, whatever the thing was, whether it was a loved one had been lost, whether it was some bad news from wherever. Sometimes they'd call me directly. There's times where the warden would get the call, and then he'd call me and say, hey, listen, can we put together a support team? I'm going to have the inmate brought over to mental health. Okay, great. So I think the communication is really important, because that call is good. You never know that point of entry as far as the call coming in. One thing I did want to mention, though, because we talked about, when the inmate got sentenced, and sometimes those long sentences, like the 2 days before and the 2 days after. But I think one thing we also need to be aware of is, like, when the inmate is getting ready to be released, right? So there are many inmates who've been in for a long time, and this fear of what the world is like since they've been down for the last 25 years, 30 years, whatever that time is, the anxiety that begins to build is so significant. For many of them, they can't handle that thought of life outside of this world that they have become so familiar with. Right? They are now unfamiliar with what's happening in the real world, and they're very fearful of it. And I think those are also the ones that we need to have eyes and ears on, because you don't know how that impulse is going to take them. And for many, they'd rather not be outside. because this is the life that they've known for so long.
Yeah, and that's a great perspective, because I also read that too, that one of the concerns could also be an inmate that's getting ready to be released that's just not ready. Again, the fear of going into the unknown, or maybe, the fear of being retaliated against once they leave, the judgment of the crime that they did. Maybe inside the prison world, they didn't feel that they were being judged to some extent, but now they're going back into the world where they could be judged. Now, there's another area I want to cover, guys, that's also important, where how staff is affected by the inmate suicide. Now, we could make this a separate video, and I have covered this before in a separate video, but you know what? Let's just keep this straight out. If you guys are watching it, you could, watch it in two parts, but it's another part that has to come out, and I'd rather keep it in one video because I do think the information, if you're watching it now, obviously you need it. So let's just keep it full circle. And yes, staff will be affected by an inmate suicide. There's many reasons. We'll go over that real quick. But I also feel that staff should be able, and it should be automatic, because sometimes staff won't admit that they need help. But if staff does witness an inmate suicide, I think it should be automatic that they get to speak to someone, whether it's a CISM response team or, an on-site. I don't know if some places may have on-site mental health for our staff. And I do think it should be automatic, because some staff may not feel that it's okay for them to feel a certain way about a death. No, it is okay. First off, there's a lot of pressure. First off, it's a human life, so we should never take that, no matter what they've done. Don't minimize it. Oh, well, they're pedophile. Guys, it's still a human life. It's tough to see, and it's tough to watch. Second thing is the responsibility. Am I still going to have a job in the morning? I don't know what's going to happen to me. So there's that part of it all. And even if you did everything you had to do, you still don't know. And the other thing is, that's our job, to protect and serve. And now we may feel that we failed at that. And for those people that hold themselves to that high level of perfection, they may not take this so easily. You know what I mean? That, hey, sometimes, and it's sad to say, but you've done everything you could. But remember, sometimes it falls through the cracks, because if an inmate's motivated, they're going to do it. So let's go with Dave first. Dave, when it comes to staff, and let's say they do have that suicide attempt that is successful, what do we need to do for the staff that had, that couldn't save that inmate's life? What do we need to do for them to make sure that they stay motivated, that, their mental health doesn't deteriorate based on what they just witnessed?
In the state of Florida, specifically at my institution, we have what we refer to as peer support. And that is one or two, particularly sergeants on shift, that they're there to support that staff member. Regardless of what's going on, regardless of what investigation, that staff member can go to that individual and talk to them, and they will take whatever time is necessary to talk to that individual. The chaplaincy department that we have is really good about talking to staff in a situation like that, as is our mental health counselor. But we've also got the employee assistance program for additional support after the initial avenues of the peer support, and the chaplaincy and mental health have done their part. And we maintain constant contact with that employee for an extended period of time after that, just to make sure that they're okay, that their mental well-being is okay.
And Gary, how important are those reactions in your mind? I mean, do you think that there will be some staff members that could take an inmate's suicide, to the heart?
Absolutely. And I also think that when somebody says it doesn't bother me, I've seen it before, I think it bothers them. You know why? Because they're saying it. They're saying, this don't bother me. This is nothing. I've seen this before. I think that that's just an outer crust that's a little hard, but inside they really are. So I think it affects everybody differently, but I think it will affect everybody in some way or another, because it's a human life that, you see a dead person, you see the body, you see the suicide. And David just explained it as perfect as you can. I would only add that if I'm on this person's shift and I'm on the front line with this person, I'm not a supervisor, but I'm on the front line with this person, I would say as a frontline coworker, give that person support as well. Ask them if they want to go fishing this Saturday. If they're golfers, say you want to go golfing this Saturday or whatever day you have off. I think everybody should help each other and get the person's mind off of what they just went through.
Right. And I have something for Connie. I know Connie wants to respond. I just want to mention, I want to get one more thing out there. And guys, listen to me. It's okay if you're custody. So I'm going to say it again. It's okay if you're custody, if this death takes a toll on you. It's okay for you to admit that. It's okay for you to say, hey, I need help. Please. Because again, it affects us all. So if you don't say nothing, then we don't know that, you need help. So guys, this is from the Tear Talk panel here. If a death occurs on your watch, if an inmate commits suicide, it's okay to say, I feel a certain way about it. 100%. Connie, I definitely got to get your perspective because the civilians have that different role. A death of an inmate is definitely could be seen as a failure from a service provider who is trying to save that inmate's life. So yeah, we'd love to hear your thoughts.
So, I think one of the big issues, especially from a service provider perspective, is that we are building these therapeutic relationships with these inmates in many instances, whether they're being seen by mental health once a week, twice a week, they're coming down for medication. The nurses are constantly seeing them. They're seeing a doctor, right? Whether it's someone who's come in with some sort of clinical conundrum, right? This person is, mentally ill, medically ill. They've got all these things going on. These are probably people that we've been in meetings with talking about how do we care for them? How do we keep them safe, right? A lot of these people that we've seen just through the clinical process, we've now grown to know them. We're like, oh, well, they're going through this week, or they're going through that next week, or what have you. And so I think because it is our role to keep them healthy, to keep them safe in this environment, for many people, when someone does commit suicide and they are successful in that attempt, we do question, what did we miss, right? There's this constant replay of, did I miss this note in the health record? Was there something that they said that I didn't respond to? Was there something I should have done different in the clinical plan? There's like constant questions of things that could have, would have, and should have been helpful in that space. I think what it is too that really becomes a challenge is, many of these environments do not give us the okay to have a feeling, right? Like, we're not supposed to necessarily feel or personalize these experiences, but we're human beings, right? And if I've established whether it was a therapeutic relationship with this person, and I kind of understand all the things that person has been through in their lifetime, it's very hard to just cut the line and say like, oh, you know what I'm saying? Like, you care that someone has taken their life, and somehow I didn't identify, that key to help them know that their life still had value, right? Like whatever that was, or whatever role I had from a service provision perspective, it certainly makes you, and for some, it may be like that catalyst to make you an even better clinician, right? Because, oh, that's what I missed last time. I'm never going to miss that again, right? Whatever that key thing is. So for me, I've had the experience of someone committing suicide, and the things that you see during that process don't go away, right? And, I like in Dave's case where they've kind of got this proactive approach to making sure there is peer support. In the situation I was in, there wasn't that. And so, to this day, I remember what he looked like. I remember what was happening with his body as he was going through this whole process. And, I never went through a debriefing. I never had the crisis team come in and talk to me. It was kind of, I needed to go out and get the support I needed to be mentally stable to come to work the next day. Right. So I think there's a lot that we can do, I think, to be more supportive of staff. But I think one of the big things that we need to do is to really make it so that in this environment, staff do not feel that they have to stifle their emotions, because when they do that, the stress eats away internally. It's just not healthy for us to feel that we cannot be human in this environment.
Yeah, I love what you said, kind of, more powerful than how I said it, but it's okay to feel. I think that to me hits home. And I want to mention something too, guys, is even if you have that inmate that cries wolf, that maybe the behavior is motivated because they want to move to a different housing unit. So they usually do that. I'm going to kill myself. I'm going to kill myself. Well, the moment you don't respond to that, because no one cares about the times you respond. All they care about is the time you don't and the person did it. You got to realize something. When you decide that you're not going to respond, that inmate may think, oh, you don't believe me? And they wind up upping their attempt. Now what happens is that fake attempt just became real, because now that person is going to try to prove to you that they're not lying, that the behavior is not motivated. And now that kind of clusters us into the last part of the dialogue, where the liability, Gary, I'll go with you first, and then we're going to move to the administrative side. I'll talk to Dave and then definitely Connie on this. So now negligence, not doing your job. Can somebody be held responsible for an inmate that took their own life? Now, I'm not saying that person murdered. Like, I didn't murder you, but you took your own life, and I didn't do my job in preventing that. And you can prove that. So negligence, whatever it is, whether it's for mental health, medical, custody, the failure to report something, the failure to communicate, can that lead to criminal charges?
It won't always lead to criminal, but it can definitely land you in civil court for a huge civil liability case against the agency. And if you think because you work for an agency and they're suing the agency, they won't sue you as an individual, they can sue you as an individual. And you say, well, I don't have any money anyway. Okay, let's say they sue you. You can't prove your case. Hopefully you can, but if you can't prove your case, there'll be a lien against you for the rest of your life that will follow you. You want to buy a house, you want to sell a house, it's going to be right on top of you the rest of your life. Now, if it turns criminal, it would be in the case where you are proven 100% that you saw this happening and you did nothing. You just said, the hell with it. It's just an inmate, let them hang. Now, if that's proven, you could end up both criminal and civil. The majority of cases go civil, but if you're really blatant and really pushing the buttons and you don't go assist somebody in a life-death situation, it could turn criminal.
Right. So, Gary, real quick, I just want to add on that. So basically the blatant disregard and the no call for help, knowing that assistance could have been done, can lead to criminal charges. Is that
what can lead to criminal? It can.
So
I'm not saying it always will, but it definitely can. And we would send our investigation to the state attorney, not only to Tallahassee Central Office, but we would send it to the state attorney. We have to. And we would send it to FDLE. By law, we have to. Now, I'm not a lawyer, so we leave the state attorney to review my investigation and determine if they want to file criminal charges. Now, I can tell you one thing for sure. David knows this too. FDLE will probably pull your certification if it's proven that you ignored these signs, and now your certification's pulled for life. You've got to document, you've got to report, you've got to do your rounds. And please, I think Anthony and Connie and David have all said this already. Even if it sounds silly, report it. I think Connie mentioned earlier, get it off your back and put it on the supervisors. Report, report, report. Cover yourself, folks.
So far we got communication, documentation. Hey, Dave, I noticed that you agreed a lot to what Gary was saying. What would you like to add to that?
Okay. If you, as an officer, have an inmate threaten suicide and decide to ignore it, then what's coming down the pipe is not going to be pleasant. Gary said most times it's going to hit you in the civil courts. That's the truth. Most times it's going to hit you in the civil courts. But if you are proven negligent in that situation, it can and sometimes will become a criminal case. And it's so simple. I said this in the quotes video, the quotes that molded me. It is too easy to do your job than to explain to a judge why you didn't do your job and this inmate is now gone. It is too easy to do your job, do your rounds. If an inmate wants to commit suicide and he wants it bad enough, he is going to commit suicide. There's nothing you can do about it. You have to deal with it after it happens. But if you take every single step you can to proactively protect that inmate from himself, you are 100% covered and you can go to bed with a clean conscience. And that's how I feel about it.
And guys, again, if you get a chance, check out that video about the quotes that molded. I just love that video. Hey, Connie, I just want to ask you something too. So again, just in this last part from the medical perspective, you get the code, medical goes there, and you don't see them doing any life-saving measures because maybe they think, well, the inmate's too far gone. Why should I even try? I mean, where's the liability? What can happen for them?
So I don't know what facility allows someone to die in jail, but like the one thing we've always said is no one dies in custody, right? So if you're not the coroner, you do not have the legal or licensure to say that that inmate is dead. Now, I know there's times where the defibrillator may not advise shock. I know that there's times where we've exhausted some of those medical interventions, but our reality is that we keep working until the emergency medical services arrives and takes that body from us. Now, are there times where, someone's already bled out and we've tried to do whatever we can to stop the bleeding and all of that? Absolutely. But the reality is that there should never be a time where we are not trying to, where there's no medical intervention happening.
And you know what's great about that? I'll get to you, Dave. I just want to add one thing. I've actually seen custody and medical swap off on compressions, and they kept it going until that, that declaration was made. Hey,
absolutely.
Hey, Dave, what do you got, Dave? You had a comment?
I have more of a question than a comment because Connie put out there that we're going to work on the inmate until EMS arrives, and I 100% agree with that. But let's say the inmate is advanced in his years and has a DNR on file. Are we still liable to work on that inmate with a DNR?
I want that one first, Connie, because I can actually answer. I can add something. You want to go first for me?
No, you could go.
All right. So check this out. We may not know. Custody's not going to know that they have a DNR at that point. So custody may keep doing what they're doing. And to be honest with you, I don't know if medical may have that. When you have that code going on, they're just rushing to save that inmate's life. You know what I mean? Now, there could be sometime where, let's say, medical may be aware because the inmate is probably in the infirmary and they have something that is long-term, but ultimately is taking their life. That's not really a medical code because the inmate's already in the infirmary and we already kind of prepared what's happening. Maybe it's a natural cause. But if the inmate is, let's say, in their cell, in an area where, maybe they're not in medical, but it's just something more spontaneous, we're going to treat it as a medical code. But if it's more long-term and they're in the infirmary, well, then it's different because most likely it's natural causes. To be honest with you, if you're calling a medical code for an inmate that's in the infirmary, it's kind of like, why? Your team is there. They're all where they need to be. And at that point, they pretty much know what's going to happen with this inmate, especially if it's something long-term. But I think if it's situational, and you have that code and you're responding, you're really responding to the situation. But I don't know if Connie wants to add to that. Would you agree with me, Connie, or am I on the same page?
No, I would agree. Because there is no way for custody to know that there's a DNR in place. If it's someone who's older, we would like to think that when there's a code, you get tons of information before the team goes running down, right? But, unless we really just know that inmate, medical knows that inmate, they know their age, they know that there's a DNR, we just have to respond as though it's, your normal active code. So I think there's always been controversy about calling codes in medical, right? So I think what we've tried to do is we would call the code so that custody was aware that there was a situation happening. Even though they're already in medical, because I think there's been times where the code wasn't called, but you've got the medical team in the midst of something in custody not know what's happening. And so to sort of help officially have that communication happening and knowing that, you know, custody is already activated, EMS, like all these moving parts that would happen in a normal code was happening even if they were in medical. So like it's one of those, you know, like, yes, it doesn't make sense to call a code when they're in medical, but we've still practiced calling the code while they're in medical.
Yeah, Dave, that's a great question too, because guys, just to go back to the suicide part of it all, even if the inmate, let's say, hung themselves and they wrote a note that says, hey, I don't want to be brought back. And let's say I'm a supervisor and I say, I'm not going to stop the team and say, hey, guys, you know, he wrote this note not to bring him back. No, our job is preservation of life at that point. I think more for the long-term illness, that DNR is more about the integrity of this person wanting to pass and just, you know, I don't want to live my life as eventually. There's some wishes there. But for that suicide response, I think you're going to go all out because, again, you know, it's more situational than opposed for medical preparing what needs to be done. And also the liability of it all, because medical can definitely lean on that DNR for a long-term illness. You know, definitely 100%. You know, and that will protect the facility from any lawsuit that may come their way when they say, well, you didn't have the authorization to turn off the plug. No, we did. The inmate was in sound mind and body when they signed that DNR. And at that point, when they signed it, because they didn't want to be a burden to anybody else, doesn't matter what the family wants at that point. If the medical and mental health agree that this inmate was of sound mind and body when they made that decision is going to hold. Hey, Dave, do you have anything you'd like to say in closing?
Just to the staff working on the front lines, remember, these are people. They're not animals. They're not property. They're people. And it is our job to, in the state of Florida, we refer to it as care, custody, and control. And care is the first word in that. And we have to take all threats of suicide and all signs of suicide as a very serious thing, because they're people. They have families on the street. We need to do everything we can to help them survive when they attack themselves. If for no other reason than their family needs them just as much as they need their family.
Yes, and guys, if you get a chance, Correctional Officer Lifestyle, it's a great channel. I'm telling you guys a lot of good information. And I believe he has cups. I do watch your channel. You're muted, but do you have Correctional Officer Lifestyle cups? I believe I saw that on the on your channel one day, right? You can unmute. Do you have those cups?
Unmute. I have cups that I'm working on. I also have shirts. I'm wearing one right now. It says corrections, one team, one fight.
All right. So you know what? I'm going to be a scrub, but can you mail me a shirt and I'll wear it? Now, yeah, I'm a big guy. I have been going to the gym, so I take an extra large. Don't laugh, Connie. Wait, did you laugh? Wait. Hold on.
Extra large. Everything I got is 3X.
So if you have an extra large, I would love that. And wait, and I'll wear it on my show, I promise. But I want to ask Connie a question, guys. A little off topic, so you guys can sign off. The information's out there. Connie, are you laughing because I said I'm a big guy, or are you laughing because I said I go to the gym?
I'm laughing because you said you go to the gym. You said that you don't. You said you don't go to the gym. You said you do not go to the gym. If you do, you go to watch other people.
It's what I do. It's what I do. You know, I motivate. That's what I do. Hey, Gary, you have anything you want to say in closing? By the way, guys, check out Gary's channel, 2 Prison Stories.
I just want to say it's our responsibility. It's what we're hired for. It's part of the job. We have to make sure the inmates stay safe and do not commit suicide. And just like I wrote in my article, is he or she faking? We don't know if they're faking, and we can't say they're faking. We have to treat every possible suicide as if it's real. And thank you for your service, and stay safe and keep reporting.
Yes, and guys, Gary just put up a great video on the Mexican cartel. You know, great video, Gary. And it comes from the viewers. The viewers requested.
It was a request. I've got a few requests I'm trying to catch up on. David, they're trying to get great. David, I have a viewer trying to get me to do a video on the old Everglades escape, the tunnel, the 6 inmates. Man, that was way back there, but I guess I'm going to throw something together.
And you know what, guys? I've been talking to Gary. I've also been talking to Dave. I think eventually they're going to start doing interviews on their channel. Eventually, you know, we're trying
Dave,
to get.
I'm subscribed to your channel for a while now. I have put a couple of comments up on your channel.
I've seen them. Yeah, I subscribed to yours today.
All right.
Mostly because I didn't know it was there, but you know.
Well, and guys, this is how the network begins, guys. We support each other in growth. Now, guys, I waited for the best. Oh, there she is.
No.
The author of The Cage Was Her Cocoon.
Oh, would you cut it out?
Oh, wait. Connie Alleyne. Connie Alleyne, do you have any closing thoughts that can not only inform us but uplift?
Well, I have one thing that we didn't mention in our conversation, and that is we really need to pay close attention when an inmate is raped. Usually after a rape, there is a very high likelihood of that inmate wanting to commit suicide. I don't know why that popped in my head, but it did. So one, I think there's the shame associated with the rape. There's the actual violation that happens. And it's really hard, I think, for them to go back into general population after experiencing that. And so for many, they opt for suicide. So when these things are happening, I mean, of course, medical would be a part of that process. Custody would be too, but you guys would see them in the housing unit side of things that we wouldn't necessarily see after the medical examination, or if they're sent out to facility. Once they return, we generally would do like a follow-up if there were any discharge instructions sent with them back to the facility. But you guys would see them on the housing side of things. So just to kind of keep a close eye on them after having those experiences. And I'm not sure how each state or each facility does to sort of support an inmate who is raped by another inmate. And I'm not talking about the PREA ones that were just somebody touched your butt. Like I'm talking about like the real true violations that we see happen from time to time.
Well, actually, it's great that you said it. Part of the PREA policy is to have the inmate that makes the allegation to be seen by mental health. And sometimes, in some cases, it's great that you said this, the inmate that makes the allegation can be put on a constant watch. And some people are like, well, that's punishment for the person making the allegation. No, if mental health doesn't clear that individual, that you're right, that person may act on impulse because, again, they may not have, I don't want to say accepted, but it may be hard for them to come to terms with what just happened to them. So yeah, that's definitely something that is put into the PREA protocol. And I think now by you saying it may help us understand why, because I think a lot of people may not understand why, because they look at that constant watch as punitive when it's not. This inmate may decide to take their own life. So 100%. And also, if we send them out to the safe nurse to be analyzed, which could be ordered by the investigating authority, they could also help us with that and say, hey, listen, it looks like that something could have happened. And at this point, it would be best for you to go ahead and have this inmate under some form of watch. Because I think, Gary, as an investigator, if that did happen, I think that's something that we take note of. Did you guys go the extra mile? Did you guys do what you got to do to make sure the inmate didn't act impulsively? Thanks for bringing that up, Connie. That's a good thought. Now, guys, again, Connie has the book on the market. She has podcasts too, Fly Behind the Wall and Voice Conversations with Connie. I still remember.
Have any conversations with Connie? That is done.
Oh, so it's just Fly Behind the Wall?
It's only the Fly Behind the Wall. The Cage Was Her Cocoon. I think I've got enough on my plate these days.
No, you're right. We got a lot of stuff. Me and Connie working on some things. But you know what's great, guys? The fact that I still remember those things and I was never on her show. Now, all right, guys. Now, my closing thoughts, guys, is even though we're saying some jokes towards the end, this is a very serious matter. And I think a couple of things that we got across, if you get anything, is communication, documentation, and it's okay to feel. I mean, those are just some very powerful things that I think can really summarize everything that we discussed. As always, guys, the show is Tier Talk. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify you every time I post a video. Next time I do a video, I'll be wearing David Smith's shirt. And as always, guys, stay safe.